I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. Lyon, we are talking about a large subject, but I want to just set the stage. We're talking about change and sustainability and resistance. And I think that you are a perfect person to talk about this with because we have talked about anti-fragility in your world, and I would love to learn more about that. But to start off, how do you lead sustainable transformation in companies where middle management is resistant?
Thanks for having me, Felicia. I really appreciate being on your podcast. To answer your question, it's very simple: transparency and communication. Regardless where you end up in a company that's struggling, let's be honest with it. If they need a turnaround or they need a new strategy, normally it's about communicating that strategy and being super transparent with where we're going in terms of objective. And that means you have to communicate that clearly, often, and check for understanding with every level of business. So it really comes down to those two concepts: transparency and communication.
Well, before we unpack your approach to really driving transformation, I want to start with your story. You've seen scale from every angle, taking companies public and turning them around, even founding your own venture model. What sparked your decision to leave behind traditional corporate work?
Well, that's a loaded question. I started in the military. So I'm from Finland originally, and I was in the military, moved to the US, went to college. Military structure is different than corporate structure, as we know, but it's funny. It gives you the, how do I say, structure to achieve an objective. And my career started after college, think Toyota, then ended up at Herbalife. And that military experience really allowed me to have that structure that is needed. We took Herbalife public. They took it private again and then public a second time. And then a couple of other companies before I then founded my own company. And to answer your question specifically, the real reason was I had this knowledge imparted upon me by really smart people that I had the opportunity to work with during my career. And I wanted to share that with companies that were either in trouble, needed a turnaround, or who were just starting out. Eventually, I figured out the model that worked really well for, let's say, below $100 million companies, and it helped drive that change that PE generally doesn't do for smaller companies, but do really well for larger size companies.
You've said something before to me that really stuck, which was it's not the C suite that blocks change, it's middle management. Tell me about when was the first time you realized that it was middle management and not the C suite?
Actually, at Herbalife, I first noticed the challenge with middle management because we had generated a perfect 10-year plan and the entire C suite was really aligned around it. However, on the middle management side, it wasn't clear how we would get there. The friction lies in the corporate officers get around the table. We go to retreats. We figure out what needs to do. And we all have shareholders that are accountable to the board, all of that type of stuff. And then somehow we fail as corporate officers and leaders of organizations and departments to share what was agreed upon in this strategy sessions and the board meetings. And that leaves middle management out of the loop and confused, to be quite clear. And to me, middle management are the meat and potatoes of any company or corporation. They're the ones that put the shovel in the ground and get it done. And if we're not clearly communicating and being completely transparent with what is needed, then they start doubting. And if they doubt, their incentives aren't aligned with the corporational goals. And that's where the challenge happens. I've seen this repeatedly, not just at Herbalife. That's your question where I saw it the first time. But then on a ongoing basis, I noticed that transparency and communication is vital from every aspect of the organization in order to ensure success.
You're saying that middle management is where things get stuck. And if I think at my own research, like our research here at CPO Playbook, we have seen that they communication gets lost almost like a game of telephone from one level to the next. Why do you feel like there is such a big gap between the C-suite and middle management? And my curiosity really sits at, do you feel like the C-suite is holding back from middle management what they don't want to hear and just going along with the ride with the PE operators or investors? Do you feel like middle management is just simply resisting the operators? Like, what is it that is keeping them from you? Because this is repeatable, you're saying that from one company to the next. So what is it?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, actually. So it comes down to incentives. Senior executives are incentivized based on achieving earnings per share, net income earnings per share if you're a publicly traded company. And they're very clear on what their bonus objectives are, the executives are. And because they're incentivized and bonused on achieving certain goals, they ensure to drive those home. Middle management, on the other hand, sometimes do not receive equity compensation. They have bonus compensation, but oftentimes their incentives aren't aligned with the business goals of the C suite. And if you think about incentives and equity incentives specifically, you earn and your asset value goes up when the company does well, not based on achieving a bonus a target that may or may not drive home the corporate strategy. So the issue is that these two have to be aligned. So this is where the smart goals that people put out and companies put out, they have to be intricately understood and figured out and aligned with the strategic goals of the company. Rather than creating high level floppy, mushy goals, they need to have pure alignment with the strategic plan where it's very clear what each individual in the corporation needs to achieve in order for for the company to succeed. What also happens is I saw firsthand in a private equity based carve out in New York where the corporation was so stuck in its ways that middle management just threw up their hands and said, for anything new that came in, this is not how we've ever done it. And this was a company that had been around for 100 years. The people that were working there in, in middle management and even in the C suite, they couldn't think about what new processes and procedures were because they were so used to the status quo. Challenge was, quote unquote, this is how we've always done it. Why are you changing it? The real answer to that was, well, double digit declines in revenue, leading to double digit declines in profitability, leading to an upset board, leading to layoffs. So, and leading to eventual poor morale and leading to strategies that were a flavor of the month. So again, people didn't believe and therefore they didn't subscribe and drive the goal forward. So the real answer to your question is incentive based rewards are the key to success. Managers are fighting either in status quo companies for greater stature or more power, more budget, what have you. If you align them around the success of the company, then it doesn't matter if my team or your team or his team or her team wins. It's about win, 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 and winning as a company.
Okay, so there's, you said twofold, and incentivization or lack of thereof, right? And the other piece is transparency and communication. And I fully believe that. So, how do you solve that problem? And I know that there was a really great quote that you had shared with me um, from your dad. Your dad had told you to make that person who's resistant, the resistor, the most important person in the room. So, could you share a little bit about that advice?
Fantastic. Yes, I was doing the turnaround in Florida. Actually, it was a startup in Florida with a manufacturing company that was already existing. They wanted to spin out something else. And the CEO was a very strong, traditional, and to the point owner. He, however, surrounded himself with a bunch of yes people, and they would not talk in public, but they would whisper in his ear, trying to get carry favor with him later on. And I noticed this. I was maybe 35, 37 at the time. So I called my dad, you know, knowing that maybe him being having more experience than I did at the time, maybe he could help me. And I asked him, how do you deal with this type of stuff happening inside of an organization where people are having side conversations trying to curry favor with the boss? And he's a finance, banking, strategy guy himself, my dad is. And he said, the guy that's whispering in the boss's ear is probably the most important person in the world to you. Make sure you put your arms around them and explain everything they need to know to ensure that they feel comfortable and they're not scared, but rather aligned. Again, we come back to transparency and communication. So I think I use this approach for everything that we do at Bhakti Ventures and any company we touch. We essentially make sure that the middle management, the line managers, and even any everyday employee know what we're doing, where the company is going, and what success looks like to ensure that transparency is there on a daily basis on what needs to get done and what the objective is. And the outcomes are aligned with their incentives. If I may, we recently wrapped up a turnaround of a UAE based company, and it was a semi governmental company that we were helping with a 5-year plan. And the main objection from the middle management was all thought they were getting fired and they were being laid off and so on. So the natural inclination at the point was to push back and try to obstruct rather than help create. And what we did was essentially make sure they felt safe. So again, transparency and communication. And once they felt safe that their jobs were not on the line and they were participating in the future of the company and the ideas that we did together, that really helped us drive a good 5-year plan to turn around the company.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. So let's walk through what happens when a company brings you in. You start discovery, collect data, and then you do something unique, which is you co-create a North Star with champions inside the business. So why is this shared vision so critical to overcoming fear and resistance? Like how do you finding those champions, and where are those champions, right? Who are those champions? So walk me through what that process looks like.
So our venture operating model is three-pronged. The first phase is what we call a discovery. And during this stage, we do the math first to understand what the company has done and where they want to go. So essentially, we go through what status quo looks like. It takes us about 2 weeks to go through a data room. And then we set up a 5-day meeting with all the stakeholders that are engaged on the project. We normally ask who the people are that are pertinent to the objective of achieving this turnaround or startup or whatever it is. And we say we generally need the CEO and the CFO, CTO, and then anyone in middle management who will be directly responsible for achieving the day to day activities of this. So essentially, who are the people that are going to be most important for the success of this company and this objective? Those are the ones we want in that room to ensure that there's alignment on the project. Again, it's about creating a clear North Star, meaning an objective that is transparent and getting early buy in to make sure that everyone knows where we're going and how we're going to get there. And they might know and oftentimes know much more than the C suite where the challenges are that we need to overcome. So the first day, we essentially listen to the middle management and C suite, of course. The second day, we ask a bunch of questions, difficult operational, financial, technology based questions. The third day, we come in with a framework that says this is what we think we need. And there are exercises in between as well to get aligned with people. The third day, we come back with a straw man that says, here's what we've heard, and here's what we think we can do. Now break it. That's right. Break our suggestion. If it's the wrong thing, we need to know it early and fix it. And we need that team to come in and help us understand what in our understanding is not quite right. And we're looking for solutions that people will buy into and drive forward.
I love that you talked about the last step, which is like asking them to break it. And this is the ultimate Q&A. The way that I think about it is that you come up with, a pilot or a guess or something that you want to test. And you ask someone to break it, not because you want it broken, but because you want to flush out the problems. Is that why you're asking that?
They are the experts of their domain. And what we want is success. We try to create value for everyone in the organization, us included, because we ultimately invest in our own projects through our fund. So we want to make sure that we're not missing anything. And one head is not as good as 10, especially if all 10 of them bring different viewpoints, but are going towards the same objective. And that objective is to create a better future for the corporation or company or project or venture. And in the long run, a better future for everybody who participates in it. That is the ultimate efficiency tool, to be honest.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you rely heavily on technology, transparency, tracking, but how do you make that real for people at every single level? So can you kind of take us inside one of those weekly touch points? What's being communicated? How does it keep people aligned, even when performance might be a little rocky?
Well, I'm a quantitative analytics person. That's how I started my career. And early on in my career, I set up dashboards, databases, and metrics. And all of that stuff nowadays, people look at you and think that you're a fossil because those are today, in today's world, those are stable states. Back in the early 2000s, coordinating millions of records of data tended to be very difficult. But what happened in today is you have the ability to create transparency through metrics and variance reports almost at the click of a finger and even on an instantaneous basis. So I picked this up from a book I read because I was in a company that grew from 30 million to 627 million in 3 years. To be quite honest, too much growth, too fast, and with no real backbone on how to manage that growth. We didn't have processes, but it was the best learning I've had in my life, or one of the best ones. Slow and steady wins the race. That's what I figured out. But what we really realized was metrics allows you to manage a company really well. If you give them on a daily basis, You can actually drive the actions that you want. And what is measured gets done. That was the old adage. And during this time, I read this book by Bryce Hoffman called American Icon. It's about Alan Mulally, who was the president and CEO of Boeing Commercial Aircraft. In 2008, he was hired as CEO of the Ford Motor Company. Now, if you recall, that's the time when there was a little bit of a recession going on. Not so little, actually. The big three automakers sat in front of Congress, and one of the congressmen famously mentioned, "Did you gentlemen drive over here in one of your fine automobiles, or did you fly?" They ended up admitting they flew in on their private planes, and they were there asking for TARP money for their automobile business. Alan Mulally wasn't at the congressional hearing, and he used something that was a little bit different. He used a method called One Ford. He set up a strategy and essentially told the entire organization about the strategy around the One Ford. And he utilized a weekly process called the BPR plan, which really means business plan review, that he held with his senior executives on a monthly basis. Attendance was mandatory. You might be in a different country on Tuesday, but on Wednesday, when the meeting's happening, you better be there, he told them. Otherwise, don't bother coming to work on Thursday. So I took this BPR process that had been very successful for Ford, and I utilized that early on in this company that was experiencing hyper growth. There were silos where C-level people were fighting over who was smarter than the other and who should be more powerful and all that other stuff that happens in a siloed environment. And when I implemented Mulally's BPR process, there were a lot of pushback. What it does, it allows people at the C level to come in. They can't bring in any person from their team. They have to know everything, and they have to be prepared to speak on every project that they have direct responsibility for. The BPR uses charts that are project specific, that highlight red light, yellow light, green light based on the project that you're tracking. If it's red, you need help. If it's yellow, it's a caution. If it's green, you're on track. And if everything's green, revenue and profitability should be going up, right? In the case it's not, someone is not being honest, and that takes the accountability and transparency and blows it up so everybody sees it. But it also creates collaboration. So we implemented this at this company. Thank you, Alan Mulally, for figuring out and helping me utilize it. And this framework helped me drive the business change that was needed in this company. And I've used this for every company since. We use that now at Bach G Ventures in a very similar way. It's part of our DNA. We show up, the North Star is the guiding principle, and the BPR is what ensures that the team, both internal and external, are aligned with the objectives and the milestones. This is how we track who needs help, who's doing great, and who needs to do better. And it creates that transparency for everyone. And it does something different as well. It allows people to have control, but it keeps them accountable. So again, control and accountability. They are in charge of their own destiny, but they're accountable to everyone in the company. The accountability part linked to transparency is what we do in our meetings.
The best way to keep people accountable is to show everyone their progress and showing everyone how you're performing. I mean, people are more likely going to do well when they know that they're on stage, right? And you're saying that this meeting happens just with the executive team. Why not bring in middle management?
Fantastic. Here's why. Because I'm a big proponent of giving people control. I'm a decentralized person. I grew up in a very top to bottom company. We took it from $1 billion to $5 billion in 8 years. Fantastic. It worked great. However, it doesn't work anymore. So the ability for the C-suite to sit around and all get together and say, this is where we are, and then replicate that meeting with their staff, that is important. So I'm for example, a chief marketing officer, and let's say the branding campaign is turning yellow in our BPR process. And the finance person says, the CFO says, hey, what's going on here? It's yellow. What's going on? What do you need help with? He might be asking. The CMO then goes to her direct reports, goes through the same BPR process, only she or he is now acting as the moderator of the meeting, and her direct reports are explaining to her everything that's happening with the projects in their purview. This allows the strategic goals of the company to filter down through the organization. At the same time, it allows the department head to be fully informed of where there are challenges and seek help when needed. So, in the example with the marketing person and the branding campaign being challenged by the CFO, when the sub BPR meeting happens, the CMO can call up the CFO and say, hey, listen, I have a challenge here. I need help with this. And can we have a committee meeting or have your team talk to my team to make sure that it's green by the time we get to the weekly CEO staff meeting? So it really is a way to drive strategy and objectives throughout the organization through transparency and communication.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. There was another situation that you shared with me. You had mentioned a company that dropped from 8 billion to 500 million in revenue. And I just want to highlight that for a moment. That is a massive cliff. How did you approach that situation? I mean, what did you learn about communicating hard truths, or maybe how to identify when it's time to pivot versus power through it?
So what used to be a $8 billion company, which had been declining heavily on a yearly basis for almost a decade, was carved out into only North America, US, Canada, and Puerto Rico, smaller than what the $8 billion company. So it was roughly about 500 million in revenue. And the people that work in the organization, they were used to a $8 billion revenue company saying, hey, I'm part of this huge conglomerate. So the company, middle management, the C-suite, everyone in the company operated this company like a $8 billion company. They would fly in people from Florida on Monday and fly them back on Friday. They would put them up in hotel right smack in the middle of Manhattan, and we were paying for hotels, room and board, cars, what have you. Just not wise use of capital, especially for a declining business. Firstly, to answer your question, the first thing I did was to listen. I sat for 2 months and just interviewed people. Everyone on, I think it was a senior manager and above, all the way up to the C-suite. I just listened to what they were doing, what their thoughts were, and where they saw challenges with the business, and obviously asking for opportunities that they had in mind. I remember this one marketing executive showing up, and he had this big 3-hole binder. And he walked in confidently, slapped the book on the table, and said, I'm here to talk about whatever you want to talk about. This is everything I manage in this book. There are about 2,500 SKUs in it, and I manage it all. So I told him, I said, okay, well, margins are important, revenue is important. Of these 2,500 SKUs, how many of them are operationally important or pivotal? He says, they all generate revenue. And I said, well, revenue is great, but margins are better. And I explained to him about good versus bad revenue. He looked at me perplexed and said, tell me about good versus bad. I've never heard this before, this concept. Revenue is revenue. So I said, Good revenue is stuff that covers cost. Bad revenue is stuff that is costing us money. So in the book of yours, about 40%, because I've looked through all of your SKUs and their profitability, and about 40% of those 2,500 SKUs, about 1,000 of them are bad revenue, meaning they generate revenue, but the maintenance of those SKUs are cost detrimental or profit detrimental because they cost more in the long run to maintain. He kind of looked at me, puffed his chest and a little bit and said, "How much of the 500 million in this book are you willing to give up, Lyon?" I said 200 million. And he looked confused. We need to consolidate, focus our efforts on the ones that are profit generators, and then get rid of anything that is a drag on the business. Find me those and come back to me with those, and let's have a conversation again. I'd rather have a healthy 300 million company than an unhealthy 500 million company. And I think this is a key point that a lot of middle management and even C suite people don't understand. When you're trying to brag about how much revenue you have, that's great, but not at the expense of profitability. That became the calling card for all our meetings. Eventually, we sold the company because, to be quite honest, the culture in the company was no longer fixable. The carve out proved that the business model was outdated and the team was, to be quite honest, outdated as well. We ended up selling it to another company, and it wasn't a very successful transaction overall. But we didn't lose any money, and we sold it to a foreign company that used it as a US entry strategy. So, all in all, people's jobs were maintained, and maybe we didn't make the capital that we sought out to make, but you have those types as well.
That's really interesting. I I say that because, well, first of all, I think that that's a really challenging project that you did. I mean, the fact that you didn't lose any money, I think is a huge win. And I also think the other point that you made, which was, the ticket items that cost you revenue, that's really key, very important what you said, because at a startup stage, early stages, you're definitely spending money to get revenue, right? But when you're growing, the amount of effort and production and efficiency needs to be tightened up in order for you to actually scale and grow. And when you're not when you're not doing or focused on those ticket items that are actually making you that margin, you're spending a lot of time, maybe more time and more money, because time is money, and salary and over bloated efficiencies that eventually cost you and cost the business to making that revenue. So it's such a smart yet such a challenging and emotional thing to do. It's really difficult. But what you said at the end, which was around culture, that I think is something else that's really valuable to pinpoint, because culture, I feel like that is what helps the sustainability of a company, right? There's product, there's other efficiencies, there's marketing. Those all help sell, help find the customer fit and so forth. But to grow, you need something that's really bringing through all of those pieces from the bottom line or first employee or prospective employees, even up to the top of the executive team and their shareholders. And culture is really what does that. And that's what makes it grow. So, my question to you is, how have you approached culture beforehand? How would you approach it today and moving forward?
Great question again. I mentioned early on that I was in the military. It's about taking the hill, and sometimes at any cost, as long as the objective is achieved. That was the old way of doing things. And it worked early on in my career. during that period, top down approaches were important, or it was the prevalent way of doing things. And especially when you're turning around the company and you have private equity, stakeholders, it's about generating profitability. And in my early days, I was that guy. What do you need done? Yes, sir. Well, I'll handle it. So I'll say it used to work. Now we have smarter people. We have clear transparency. It's about doing it the right way rather than at any expense or any means possible. You have to gather your people around you. You have to explain to them what we're going to do, and we're going to explain to them that their interest is aligned with the company's, and that if they see something that isn't optimal, speak up and we'll adjust the plan to ensure that everybody is aligned. As the old adage says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring people.
Well, I think that you have shared so much insight, and I hope as many people as possible hear this episode because I agree with everything that I mean, I have experienced all of these things, and everything that you have shared really hits home to not just my work, but I feel like to those leaders that might be struggling and, helping them understand what they can do next. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. This was really great. If today's episode captured your interest, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving a review. To learn more about how CPO Playbook can support you or a leader you know with executive coaching or organizational transformation, visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.